I gave it a link to a video, a long video that was reviewing Apple's Vision Pro mixed reality AR headset. Too long for me to watch, but I wanted to know what the reviewer thought. And I used a plugin to help me do this. We'll cover plugins in the course. It summarized a whole YouTube video and gave me a nice, quick summary that was very easy to read. So this course is all about using ChatGPT and Midjourney in your day-to-day life. And we're starting with ChatGPT for the first portion of the course. I think it's pretty safe to assume that most of you are familiar with ChatGPT, you know what it is. But in this video, if you don't know what it is, I'll explain, but I'll also talk about some important terms that may come up or will come up throughout the course. By the way, all the imagery you see here is generated by Midjourney. So just a little shout out to Midjourney and everything you see on the slides here. So what exactly is ChatGPT? ChatGPT is a web-based interface to a large language model, and there's a couple of choices for which model that is. Basically, it's a web client that allows us to communicate and have a conversation with an AI model behind the scenes. Typically, we provide text as input, and we'll get human-like text in response. Although sometimes, with GPT-4, we'll actually get images in response, diagrams in response, downloadable files in response. It's not only text to text, but that's how it started. And as we've already seen in the previous video, we can use ChatGPT to generate text, code, analysis, visualizations, a whole bunch of other things. So this is just some of my chat history. I use ChatGPT in a very simple way to get it to write me some tweets. I hate Twitter. I'm very bad at Twitter. I had it write me some tweets. But here's something completely different. I gave it a link to a video, a long video that was reviewing Apple's Vision Pro mixed reality AR headset. Too long for me to watch, but I wanted to know what the reviewer thought. And I used a plugin to help me do this. We'll cover plugins in the course. It summarized a whole YouTube video and gave me a nice, quick summary that was very easy to read. Here, I gave it some code, a data set, and it generated me diagrams. Here, I had it generate me a full web application. So there's a lot of things that we can do with it, but at the end of the day, the core mechanism is that there's a text box down here where I can type messages and get some sort of message back. It's important to note the distinction here between ChatGPT and then the underlying models, GPT 3.5, GPT 4, and then presumably eventually GPT 4 point something or GPT 5. The models are what does all of the hard work. The models are trained over months and months, or in some cases years, trained on all sorts of data. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And one way of communicating with these models is via ChatGPT. We type something into the text box on the website. Do I need to put fresh eggs in the fridge? That is then sent off to a model, and then the model responds back with some sort of text, and we see it rendered in the browser. That's the ChatGPT workflow, which, by the way, you don't have to refrigerate fresh eggs if you haven't washed them. But we also could communicate with the very same models using their APIs, which is not what this course covers. I have a whole separate course on using the GPT family of APIs. But basically, you can integrate the functionality of these models within your own applications. So you can ask it a question through code, it's sent off to the model, and you get a response back through code. But in this course, we're talking about ChatGPT, which is a way to communicate with those very same models using a web-based interface where I don't have to write code, right? I just type text into a box and hit enter. A little more terminology. LLM is something you may see throughout the course or just reading documentation. It stands for large language models. These are a family of AI models that work with text. They understand and generate human-like text. And the way that they work is that they're initially trained on a huge amount of text data, and they learn to predict the next word, or technically what we call the next token, in a sentence or in a piece of output. What is slightly controversial is what the models are trained on. There's all sorts of ongoing lawsuits and criticism over not just OpenAI, which is the parent company that created ChatGPT and the GPT models, but all sorts of different AI model companies, because what they basically did was take the entirety of the internet, or at least a very large subset of the internet, of Wikipedia, of databases of online books that are obviously written and created and have license owned by other people, the authors usually. So they take all this information, huge data sets of what is essentially most of the web. And they train models on it. And like I said, it's kind of controversial because there's all sorts of weird, tricky licensing issues there. I mean, some of my own content, my own videos, YouTube descriptions, my own course content shows up in the model. I can only presume that it was trained on my content and many other Udemy courses because I can ask it very specific questions about myself, but also stuff straight from my courses, and it uses the same language that I use in my courses. So these models take tons and tons of time, tons of data to train, but then once they're trained, they are trained. And then from that point onwards, we can basically converse or provide input text and get output text. Also, the information you see here is all about GPT-3. OpenAI has not released any information on the training of GPT-4. We'll talk about the distinction between the two shortly as well, but I think that they want to avoid any controversy, so they have not revealed what parts of the internet, what new data sets. There's lots of images that it was trained on, lots of code that it was trained on. There's speculation that it was trained on the entirety of GitHub, but none of it has been officially confirmed by OpenAI. Now, while we're talking about terminology, the GPT portion of ChatGPT, or the model names GPT-3, GPT-4, and so on, stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. That's really all you need to know. I don't even know if you truly need to know that. That's where the T comes from in GPT. Generative, I think that part's self-explanatory. Pre-trained, we already discussed. The models are pre-trained. It's basically a one-time thing. They're trained, and then they're usable. Okay, so that's our quick intro to the concept of ChatGPT. It's this web-based interface where you can type text, hit enter, and that text is sent off to a model behind the scenes. Which model it's sent to is something that we can control, and that's what we're going to talk about very shortly.